Hello and welcome to Prime Business. I am Beverly Broohm. Now to our first story, the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Association of Bankers, John Ewuah, has shut down against suggestions to regulate the interest rate regime in the country. The Association of Ghana Industries, in a recent reaction to high interest rates, hinted that it will meet the Bank of Ghana to intervene in the market by engaging banks to reduce their cost of credit to the private sector. Here's more in the following report.
Businesses have in recent times complained about high interest rates, a situation private sector operators say is negatively impacting on their operations. The central bank, in an attempt to control inflation, has increased the policy rate to 19.5%. This is said to be impacting on interest rates as banks adjust their rates upward. In response to suggestions by industry to bring in some control, the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Association of Bankers, John Ewuah, maintained that such a move will be counterproductive.
We've heard these comments before, and our position has been one that interest rates, have never been a subject for regulation in terms of mandating, stealing for lending rate. Just like AGI will not be happy for their products, the pricing for their products to be determined by a certain external hand. The same way, we are in the same market. Why would you want a bank to go through that regime? And in the first place, countries that went that route have all reversed because you cannot legislate it. It's not like the banks have woken up all of a sudden and have gone to increase their interest rates.
Describing the current situation as temporary, Mr. Ewuah expressed optimism that the macroeconomic figures will soon normalize as prices stabilize.
We are very much with the governor when the governor said that we believe the present situation is for the short term. We all know the global economy where we are playing, and we also believe that most of the inflation that have pushed the rates to where they are now are imported inflation, and that as circumstances around the world with the supply chain constraints, tapering off, we envisage a gradual decline in inflation, and which should positively impact the lending rate. So we have every cause to believe that it is temporary. It's a concern, even if it is for the short term, but we believe that by this time next year, we should not be trending around the rates that we have at the moment.
Now let's talk about Treasury Bills, because government has finally sold a little above the target for its Treasury Bills auctioning following months of undersubscription. Liquidity had remained tight on the financial market all this while. Head of Trading at Republic Securities, Patrick Edem-Agama, has this update.
It was largely on the back of the subscription of the 91-day Treasury bill. Investors' appetite for that 91-day Treasury bill is growing very, very fast. And this is because we've seen it close at 22.57 interest rate, and bids as high as 23.5% were accepted for this particular auction. For the 182-day Treasury bill, it stood at 172.96 million for the bids tendered, but only 171.01 million were accepted, which also could close at 24.41%.
For how long do you think this is going to continue? Is it for the short term, or we should expect this to go on for a while? Your forecast?
Well, in my opinion, I expect this to go on for a while, because if you look at the bids accepted for the 91-day, as high as 23.5 were accepted. So it should tell you that the next auction, we should expect bids to be going to that level. For the 182-day, as high as 25% of bids were accepted. So it should also give us an indication of where investors' appetites are for the coming days.
Away from that, some public sector workers' union have taken on government statistician Professor Samuel Kobna-Anim for saying that public sector workers are overpaid. Delivering his inaugural lecture at the University of Cape Coast last week, Professor Anim said while earnings for the average public sector worker is about 3,420, output in the sector averaged about 1,400 420, less than half the earnings. We'll hear from the union shortly, but before that, let's listen to Professor Anim.
Look at your inputs, look at your outputs. So I said, begin that conversation on productivity, because if you want to increase that 459 billion by even 10 billion, it depends on how much we are getting on a monthly basis, on an hourly basis, on a weekly basis. So in this lecture, what I've done is to put together the GDP data and to put together the GDP data with the census data. Look at our population, those employed, and I narrow down to what we teach at the basic level, what we call the income identity. Basic economics. What people earn should be equal to their output and should be equal to what they spend. Let's look at what is happening in terms of monthly data. Earnings only from the public sector is about 3,420 Ghana cedis. On the average, output per person is about 1,420, depending on whether you use just the number of people or discount it based on the number of work, of hours. So we see twice the difference between our output and our earnings. I didn't speak so much about the data on expenditure because it's captured at the household level, so the unit of analysis should be looked at carefully. But once I see this, at a time that people are talking about neutrality allowance, our earnings are twice our output. There's something basically wrong. And this is coming from our formal sector. So when I got a privilege to host the UTAG executives nationally on our single spine, which was led by our own president.
But NAGRATS, one of the big unions within the education sector, are angered by the statement. According to the president of the association, Angel Kabonu, the statement from the government statistician simply do not reflect reality.
Very serious problem with the statement of the government statistician, because he has jumped onto the bandwagon of people who make generalized statements without giving us any measurement reference or measurement module that we all can refer to, or what he is using. Workers in this country work. Workers in this country have never resisted supervision. Workers in this country are working even when we don't have the working tools. And workers in this country are providing to the people of this country services despite the fact that government is reneged on its responsibilities. So we expect the government statistician, and in any case, when there is a title called government statistician, some of us have very serious fundamental problem with that title, government statistician.
Meanwhile, Secretary of the University of Ghana branch of UTAG, Professor Ransford Jampo, says it was not academic and scholarly for the government statistician to lump together all public sector workers in the assessment he did.
In these current times of austerity and hardship, it is inhuman for any academic to make assertions that palpably regard the toil and hard work of some real public servants. Any blanket assertion that suggests that all public servants earn more than they produce without first telling us the outcome of specific job evaluations and labor market surveys undertaken, in my view, is a sweeping assertion that can only be made by an academic with partisan lenses and partisan sympathy. You cannot lump all public servants together. You must necessarily disaggregate. Public servants are not necessarily homogeneous bunch of workers. There are those whose appointments are based on nepotism. These are the ones who, for lack of expertise, can be described as earning more than they produce. And this category of public servants must be distinguished from professionals and qualified people appointed within the public service who work so hard to produce, if you like, nation builders like university teachers, and yet receive fitters and get mocked that their hard work is rewardable only in heaven. You can also talk about the last segment of public servants who are politicians whose only qualification to office is excessive partisanship. They earn beyond imagination and produce propaganda. And so we are not the same. It cannot be part of any serious scholarship or any academic to lump all of us together. It doesn't show scholarship.
Well, that's how we end Prime Business here. We have more news when you log on to myjoyonline.com. My name is Beverly Broohm. Have a good evening.